is that right?
Yeah, kind of.
Just like a bit of everything, but like...
Yeah, mostly, I mean,
Stone's
Stone's absolutely my first love.
Yeah.
I did like, I actually started carving stone at school. I had a art teacher at school who just one day saw me making something in clay and said that would be good in stone, and he was a stone carver, so he just brought in a chunk of stone and said, get on with it, and it was just like I'd been doing it all my life.
Yeah.
And it was brilliant. So, but then I had a wee bit of a break because I let the career teacher at school tell me that there was no way that you could be an artist as a career. So I ended up. They said, well, people who are good at sculpture make good architects. So I was like, okay, architect. Well, that sounds like big sculptures. That sounds like a good crack. Like,
yeah.
It wasn't like that. And then I kind of fell out of that and ended up. I actually ended up working with a circus for about 2 years, like rigging trapezes and messing around with that kind of stuff. But then I got rescued by this sculptor who took me in as like an apprentice, and he was a stone carver. So that was my art training, was a kind of pretty traditional apprenticeship, actually.
Taken in, you're like, oh, I can do it, actually. Brilliant.
Oh, totally, it was amazing. Yeah, he was a really lovely man. Yeah, and but I always said while I was doing that what I really wanted to do was kind of like public sculpture. I didn't really want to make things for galleries. I kind of wanted to do stuff that involved, I don't know why, I just had this really strong feeling that that's what I wanted to do. And I was really lucky that I got an opportunity to do that at the end of when I was working with Brian, who was the sculptor. And that was me. I then just went on a path of public kind of working in, I don't know, I have a real thing with places, and that's what drives what I do.
So do you, what sort of research do you conduct when thinking about a project, and do you look at other artists' work?
Well, the kind of research that the research it's kind of interesting because the research has almost become what I do. So when I was doing those kind of like stone pieces, and in the early days, the research was quite traditional in the sense of I'd walk a lot and I'd talk a lot to people who, all the work that I've made has been connected with particular places. So I'd go walking, talking, and then I'd read history books, or if there'd been poems or stories written about the places, that was the kind of stuff I did. And I'd talk to, so if there was like water involved, I'd talk to scientists that knew about water or whatever. That was the kind of research I did. As far as looking at other artists, not so much really, to be honest. I do look at other artists, but I don't know. I suppose I had I suppose I kind of like grew up in a modernist sort of tradition of like everything had to be completely original, and I didn't want to be feeling like I was copying anything. But I think all artists, we all link things from each other all of the time, and I think that's actually a good thing. It's about just continuing a tradition. But at the time when I was starting out, I tended not to look too much at other stuff. But the thing, when I was saying about the research, it's actually become an end in itself these days, because I got so interested in people's relationship to where they lived that actually became a big part of the work of connecting to people. And so I end up in situations where I wasn't necessarily going to make a particular thing or do a particular thing, but I'd end up just weaving stories around places and people's connections to them, and those became works in themselves, through kind of performances and films. And
do you think it's like, do you think some people are missing out by creating artworks just kind of through themselves rather than asking.
Okay, through being a kind of more connected process. Yeah. Well, yeah, that's pretty massive. I told you we wouldn't be done by exactly 7 o'clock. I would never judge, right?
Yeah.
It's not my thing. I think the way I think about it is that we're all part of a. You need to look at what art is for, and if you see that as a very, very long continuing tradition, I think art has always been about kind of communicating and connecting with an audience, and in the past it's been about conveying ideas, be they religious ideas or philosophical ideas, and then at a certain, there was a sort of like a break of meaning at a certain point where things started to split up into, there was, for a long time things were quite general, people knew a bit about lots of things, and there was a kind of like a split at a certain time where you became a scientist or an artist or a writer or a doctor or whatever, and you became very, very sort of specialised in that one thing. And I think at that point the idea that the artist was suddenly being asked to go off into their studios and create philosophies about what the world meant, and then illustrate those philosophies and then present those ideas to a public, and that to some extent is the art tradition that we now have inherited. And to me I'm not interested in that tradition particularly, because it actually seems to be making art about art, and I'm not that interested in that. I'm interested in an art that opens spaces of communication and possibility with kind of people, and communicates to people and audiences. So
do you think that's...
Shouldn't ask me questions like that.
Good. Do you think that's where your like inspiration and motivation comes from?
The communication thing. Yeah, these days, that's what I was saying about the research thing. I kind of tend to identify something that I want to work with. Like when I'm working in Dumfries, I identify in Dumfries that the high street's pretty fucked. The relationship to the river is, could be better. The people in Dumfries feel a bit like Dumfries is a bit rubbish, but people who live in Moniaive and other places would rather die than go into Dumfries half the time, and you can't. But yet there's a strong sense of what it could be, and a pride in the possibilities in the place, and that becomes the thing that drives what I want to do. So that becomes like a mission for me, of like I'm trying to achieve something, and that's quite different to a kind of like art for art's sake thing of I'm just making my art and I don't care what anybody thinks about it, and it's actually, it's quite a sort of radical position, and then some people would say that what I'm doing isn't art at all, it's a kind of like activism or something. It's not, so take it or leave it, you can decide.
Do you have any kind of like working habits, like when like going through a creative process? Do you do like kind of sketches, and how does your kind of creative
absolutely
work?
No, I love to draw, and there's a kind of like, there's a big, I think my creative process is one of just gathering from everywhere, of like you just like become this aerial when you're starting something off, of like everything you're looking at, like that thermos flask or something suddenly takes on this massive significance of like, that's it, I'm going to make this work about this thermos flask, and you gather all of those things and draw them, photograph them and stick them in sketchbooks, and then there's a process of honing that down and re-looking at all of those things and kind of constantly flicking through the sketchbook of like what's the thing that's jumping out at you. It might be a word, a phrase, an image, a colour, or whatever, but something then becomes the hook of like that's what's driving this next piece of work, and then it's a case of then you go into a kind of technical phase of how do you realise it, how's it going to stand up, what's going to, is the wind going to blow it down, is somebody going to climb up it and fall off it and injure themselves, so you've got to kind of like think about all of those kind of like practical realities then come into it, and also how people are going to understand it, how you're going to communicate it. That becomes the next stage, but it's always really important to keep going back to that original thing that you felt was the hook and the driver.
Do you think that through art we can perhaps kind of help to change, like, say, basically the world, the class divide?
Yeah, totally. Totally. When people ask me for a really short biography for like a conference or something, my really short biography is a long time ago I became an artist to change the world, and I don't see any reason to change now. That's my biography. And yeah, I think art should be about something. It should be about ideas. It should be about possibilities. It should be about opening people's minds and empowering people. That's a really big, important thing for me, is creating opportunities for people to be part of. We haven't talked about collaborating, working in teams, and bringing people into the work, which is a big part of what I do. And that for me is about creating opportunity and the confidence, self-confidence in people to kind of go on and do, and say, well, like, because I think artists are often sort of like mad enough to stick their heads up above the parapet and do crazy things when the rest of the world thinks, well, no, can you do that? Like, so, and I think that's inspiring. I think that's one of the roles that we have, is to inspire other people to do the things that they dream of, and that you can do them, and you often don't have to ask permission. You just get on and do it, and that inspiration and example is as important as anything else that we do, as far as I'm concerned.
And I think that's pretty much it.
We did it!
Yay!
Cool!
I muddled up the thing of the questions, so yeah. That's all of my questions. Thank you.
So you wrote the questions?